Well, hello. Welcome to Quilts and Other Happy Accidents. I'm Sherry. I have all sorts of these end cuts. Um, it's a really long story on where they came from, but I hate to throw them away. In fact, I'm not going to throw them away. I'm going to find projects for all of these. And I've been thinking about it for a long, long time, and I was like, I don't know how many I have. I don't know if it's even enough for a whole quilt. Well, while I was at the sewing lab the other day, someone had donated a giant sheet. Now, it's a very usable piece of fabric, but it's not usable by their standards. And so I just brought it home with me. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, that's the perfect material for string piecing. And I have the perfect strings for it. So I've cut this into 9-inch squares because I really like 8-inch finished blocks. I know that sounds a little weird, but just stick with me for a while because I wanted to start with a 9-inch square and then see what it looked like if I cut it on the diagonal. Isn't that great? I really feel like this is too busy of a block. I mean, it would work, but again, I'm not sure how much I have. If you haven't seen my previous videos, I'm all about using up what I have. And I've done great. In a year, I've used up, oh, I can't even tell you how much fabric. So I went to the stash to see if I could find something that would work to make half square triangles. And I did. I have a strong fondness for batiks. And I went through an Asian phase. And so, aren't those pretty? It's soft enough that I think when I put it next to these really bold prints, that it's going to work. I think it'll pop out and give enough contrast. So let's go to the machine and we'll see what I've been doing. One. Well, I'm actually in our family room. The construction in our kitchen is finally done, so I can use some different spaces for life in general and for filming, and that helps a lot. So with this project, I'm making string blocks. I have cut the sheet that I'm using for my foundation into 9-inch squares, and I made some rules for myself. First of all, I'm going to work with color families. And so I've divided things up, and right now I'm working on the blues. I started with the purples, and I learned some things as I went. First of all, this 9-inch foundation is going to shrink a little bit. So be sure as you're sewing that you leave some ends here. You can always trim them off, but this will give you plenty of room to keep your 9-inch original block. Second of all, I'm trying not to use selvages. I just don't like selvages in regular quilt and fabric. I mean, it's probably old school from when I learned to sew when I was a kid, but it does move differently and lays differently. So I'm trying not to use selvages. Um, Last rule is when you're close to the end, you know, just use a smaller piece or make 2 rows because this is going to be really hard to work with. Um, it's a tiny little piece here. I'll make it work, but it's not going to be easy. Now, as I was sewing along, and some of these are really beautiful blocks. I mean, yeah, I'm using the blues and the purples, but even this pink has a lot of blue in it, kind of blending the blues and the purples. I've got several blocks made. I'm going to make one block to demonstrate for you, and then we're going to show you how to use these for half square triangles to make our final block. Come over here. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Well, I'm still working with blues, and here's my stack of blues. Um, I'm just going to start here. As you can see, I've got a selvage here. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. Actually, I have already trimmed most of it off, and I'm okay with that. But that finished edge is what I wanted to get rid of. And when you're string piecing, it's probably just about the easiest thing in the world to do because you just sew one on top of the other. And I'm going to start here. I'm giving myself extra on the end. Remember, we want to give ourselves extra because we know it's going to shrink. And I've overlapped, so I've got extra on the end there. Now I'm going to choose my next fabric, which is going to be this pretty batik. Now, again, I've already trimmed it. And I'm just going to line these two up like this. Don't worry about if they're perfectly lined up. It doesn't matter because so many of these are end cuts and they're not going to be equal length or a straight piece of fabric at all. And that's kind of what makes it interesting. Now I'm just going to finger press this over like this and choose another blue. Again, I've already trimmed the edges off, so they're ready to put on. I'm going to line these two, I'm going to line up with each other, but again, leave extra on each end. I'm going to do this over and over until I fill this. Finger press this over. You could take it to the ironing board and press it, but now you can see it's wider on this end than it is on this end. So the next piece I'm going to choose, hopefully I can find a piece, is wide in the opposite direction. Let me show you what I mean. How about this one? Oh, rule number 3 that I made for myself, or 4, I don't know. Um, Try not to use the same fabric in each of these blocks. Now, this one's not perfectly straight. I've got it narrow on this end and wide on this end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this wide end over here where it's kind of going uphill, and we'll see if we can't get it to straighten out a little bit. Well, I finished that row, and you can see how having it slightly wider on this end than this end really helped to square it up. I'll probably have to do that a time or two again. It doesn't matter if it squares up perfectly. At the end of the day, we're just going to fill this all in with these fabrics and make a string block. When I get this, I hope you saw how I just added and decided to use this last piece because it's really wide here and narrow here, which is what I need to help square this up. All right, let's take it to the cutting table and trim it all up. So I'm lining this up to make it a 9-inch square. And you can see, I hope, that this foundation piece has distorted a little bit. Not a problem at all. We are just going to make it 9 inches. Now that I've got a square edge here on 2 sides. Now, if you don't have one of these large cutting squares, you can measure from side to side, or you can create your own template. You could use a cardboard box or whatever you want to create that perfect 9-inch square, and that would help you to get these taken care of. There we go. Now we're going to make half square triangles. Here is my 9-inch piece, and I'm going to lay this on the diagonal and go from corner to corner and make a mark. Now the tricky thing about this is you have to allow room for your marking utensil, whatever it is. I've got a fine tip marker here, so it's not that big of a deal. I had to adjust my light so you could see my line. Now the machine I'm using does not have a 1/4-inch foot, nor do I have a marking on it. So I'm going to lay the 1/4-inch mark right on that line, and this is going to be my 1/4-inch sewing line. I'm going to flip it around and do it on the other side. Let me show you that again. Because I am not going to cut my string pieces until I've already sewn these together to their other half. There's my sewing line. Once we sew this and cut it along the cutting line, we're going to have an 8.5-inch block, which will finish at 8 inches. So our 9-inch block becomes 2 8.5-inch blocks once they're trimmed, which become an 8-inch finished block. Let's go back to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to do that. I'm here at the machine and I'm lining up my corners as near as I can so that everything stays nice and parallel. I'm going to use these clips. You don't have to use clips. You could use pins or you could just wing it, you do you. But it's important that all the corners line up as closely as possible so that we get nice half square triangles. Now their center is my cutting line and I have my 1/4-inch mark on each side for my sewing line. If you have a 1/4-inch foot, you don't necessarily need to draw that line. I don't, so I just drew it to get this as precise as possible. The interesting thing about this half square triangle idea is one of the blocks has multiple layers of fabric. So by clipping them, we're sure that they don't move around. It's much easier to make your half square triangles this way. If you were to cut along that cutting line before you sew,
you would run the risk of the stretch that happens along the bias. I just like doing this way much easier. So I'm going to take the clips off and we'll take this to the cutting mat. You could cut it with scissors. Oh, but look at this. This is what it's going to look like. And we've got a little extra room so we can square it up. It's going to be beautiful. Let's go to the cutting mat.
Here we are at the cutting table. You can see my two seams. I'm going to cut corner to corner. Then we're going to press them open so that this bulk goes to this single side. And then I'll bring you back and we'll square it up. I'm all pressed. I took this bulky side over to this single side. I just love these blocks. They're just beautiful. Now, to square them up, find your 8.5-inch mark on your square and set it right on that diagonal. Then line these corners up diagonally. And then you can see exactly how much we're going to trim off. Let's do it the other way. Maybe it'll be a little easier to see. Here's your diagonal seam and your diagonal seam. And we're going to line up 8.5 inches on each side right along this diagonal. Let me zoom it in. So here's my diagonal line on my square. We're going to line it up 8.5 inches. Oops, it moved just a smidge on this side and cut it along there. Now we're going to do the same thing in the opposite direction. 8.5-inch mark set on the diagonal along these straight edges now that we've cut. Look how easy that was. Very little waste here. So much easier than trying to calculate 5/8 and 7/8 and 3/8 and Let me show you what I've got up on the wall. A long way to go, but I've made some really fun blocks. One. Here are the half square triangles I have so far, and for those of you who are aficionados, you can see easily the mistake that I've made. The mistake I made was I forgot I was working with stripes because these two were obviously from the same block. I cut corner to corner differently. So, a word of caution. If you want them to all go the same way, you're going to have to really watch it. Now, if you're going to be making some interesting patterns and going to turn things topsy-turvy, probably it's not going to make a big deal. But there's so many layouts that are possible here. And you could just keep going, twisting and turning any way you wanted to turn it. I have lots of blocks to go. I've only done the blues and the purples, and they're not even all up here. This is clearly going to be an ongoing summer project, but one that will use up my string pieces and use up things out of my stash. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I hope you enjoy making this block. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.